The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Redemption, Texas, as Clara Ellis stumbled forward, the sting of her father's hands still burning on her back where he had violently pushed her out the door. Her chestnut hair fell in tangles around her tear-streaked face as she landed hard on her knees, the contents of her hastily packed bag scattering across the dirt road. Behind her, the door to her family home slammed with such force that the windows rattled, her father's final words hanging in the scorching summer air of 1875. "No daughter of mine will disgrace this family with such behavior." Clara's trembling hands scrambled to collect her few possessions: a hairbrush, a small leather-bound journal, a faded daguerreotype of her mother, and the crumpled remains of the letter that had sealed her fate. The letter from the university in Boston accepting her application to study medicine, a dream she had harbored since childhood, but one her father deemed unnatural and shameful for a respectable young woman of 22. Leave her be. Her father shouted from inside when her younger sister tried to open the door. "She's dead to us now." The words cut deeper than any knife could, and Clara's vision blurred with fresh tears as she struggled to her feet, painfully aware of the curious stares from passers-by. In a town as small as Redemption, news traveled fast, and by sundown, everyone would know that Benjamin Ellis had cast out his eldest daughter. She was so focused on gathering her dignity along with her scattered belongings that she didn't notice the approaching rider until his horse came to a stop beside her. The animal's shadow fell across her crouched form, providing momentary relief from the relentless Texas sun. "Miss, are you hurt?" The voice was deep but gentle, tinged with concern that sounded genuine rather than merely curious. Clara looked up, squinting against the sunlight that framed the rider in a golden halo. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, his face partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn Stetson. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice betrayed her with a telltale crack. Pride demanded she refuse assistance, but her circumstances left little room for such luxuries. The stranger crouched beside her, helping to collect the last of her belongings. His hands were calloused but careful as he picked up the daguerreotype, its frame now slightly bent from the fall. "Your mother?" he asked, handing it to her with unexpected gentleness. Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice as she accepted the treasured image. When their fingers brushed, she felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "Patrick O'Malley," he offered, extending his hand formally despite their position crouched in the dirt of Main Street. His eyes, she noticed now, were a striking shade of blue that reminded her of the summer sky after a rainstorm. "Clara Ellis," she replied, accepting his handshake with as much dignity as she could muster. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful. Patrick glanced toward the Ellis house, where the curtains twitched as someone likely her younger brother watched the scene unfold. His expression darkened briefly before returning to Clara. "Seems you've found yourself in a difficult situation, Miss Ellis." His observation carried no judgment, only a quiet understanding that somehow made her feel less alone. A gust of wind blew down the street, sending dust swirling around them and causing Clara to shield her eyes. When she looked again, Patrick was studying her with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable under different circumstances. "I don't mean to pry," he said softly, "but do you have somewhere to go?" The question laid bare the full reality of her predicament. She had friends in town, of course, but none who would risk the ire of Benjamin Ellis by taking in his disowned daughter. The stagecoach to Boston wouldn't arrive for another week, and the money she had saved would barely cover the ticket, leaving nothing for lodgings in the meantime. "I'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt, retrieving her bag from the ground and brushing off the dust. Patrick O'Malley stood, towering over her with his impressive height. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. The gesture was oddly formal, a courtesy rarely extended to women who had been publicly cast out by their families. Miss Ellis, he began, then hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I own a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My sister lived there with me until her marriage last spring. He cleared his throat. What I'm trying to say is, there's a spare room if you need a place to stay until you sort things out. Clara stared at him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer, but found only sincere concern in his expression. Still, she knew what accepting would mean for her already tattered reputation. That's very kind, Mr. O'Malley, but I couldn't possibly— I understand your hesitation, he interrupted gently. But the desert is no place for anyone to be without shelter, especially as evening approaches. He glanced at the setting sun. Stay with me, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, at least until you've had time to make proper arrangements. Something in those 3 simple words, stay with me, reached past Clara's defenses. Perhaps it was the absence of demand in his tone, or the respect with which he'd treated her, despite finding her literally in the gutter. But she found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the implications. Just until I can secure passage to Boston, she clarified, needing to establish boundaries even in her desperate state. Relief softened Patrick's features. Of course. He retrieved his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that stood patiently nearby. This is Rusty, he introduced, patting the animal's neck. He's sturdy enough to carry us both back to the ranch if you don't mind sharing the saddle. Clara hesitated. Riding double with a man she'd just met would certainly cause talk, but then again, what did she have left to lose? Her father had already ensured that her reputation in redemption was irreparably damaged. I don't mind, she said, allowing Patrick to secure her bag to the saddle before helping her mount. She settled awkwardly side-saddle, hyper-aware of his proximity as he swung up behind her. His chest was solid against her back, his arms creating a secure cage around her as he took the reins. Hold tight, he instructed, and she gripped the saddle horn as Rusty began to move. They rode in silence through town, Clara keeping her gaze fixed straight ahead despite feeling the weight of curious stares. She wondered what stories would circulate about Benjamin Ellis's disgraced daughter riding off with Patrick O'Malley, a man she knew little about beyond his name, and the fact that he owned a ranch. As they passed the general store, the owner's wife, Mrs. Peterson, emerged with a basket of goods. Her eyes widened at the sight of them, and Clara could practically see the gossip forming on the woman's lips. Patrick must have noticed too, for he tipped his hat politely in greeting, a gesture that seemed designed to convey that there was nothing unseemly about their arrangement. People will talk, Clara murmured once they had passed beyond the town limits. Patrick's soft chuckle rumbled against her back. People always talk, Miss Ellis. In my experience, it's best not to give their words more power than they deserve. The wisdom in his response surprised her. You don't seem concerned about being associated with someone who's been cast out. There was a brief pause before he replied, I've learned to form my own judgments about people. And from what I've observed in the 5 minutes I've known you, you're someone who deserves better than what happened back there. His words warmed something inside her that had gone cold when her father's hands had pushed against her back. As the town receded behind them and the open landscape of the Texas frontier stretched before them, Clara found herself wondering if perhaps this sudden, dramatic turn in her life might lead to something unexpected. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the vast sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that gradually deepened to purple. In the distance, Clara could make out the silhouette of a modest ranch house nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. Home, Patrick said simply, following her gaze. It's not much compared to your father's place in town, but it's peaceful. Clara thought of the oppressive silence that had characterized her father's house after her mother's death 5 years ago, the weight of his expectations and disappointment pressing down on her with each passing day. Peaceful sounds wonderful, she admitted. As they drew closer, she could see that while the ranch house was indeed modest, it was well maintained. A covered porch wrapped around the front and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Beyond the house stood a barn and several corrals where horses grazed in the fading light, A dog's bark announced their arrival, and moments later, a border collie came bounding toward them, tail wagging enthusiastically. "That's Scout," Patrick said as he brought Rusty to a stop near the hitching post. "Don't worry, he's friendly, just eager to meet new people." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lowering her to the ground with care. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could detect the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin before he stepped back respectfully. "Miss Clara," a voice called from the porch, and Clara turned to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair hurrying toward them. "Patrick sent word with young Tommy Williams that you'd be joining us. I'm Mrs. Abigail Hudson, the housekeeper. Come inside, dear, you look done in." Clara glanced at Patrick in confusion. "But how? I asked a boy from town to ride ahead while I was helping you gather your things," he explained with a slight smile. "Thought you might appreciate having another woman here when you arrived." The thoughtfulness of this gesture left Clara momentarily speechless. It was exactly the kind of consideration her father would have deemed unnecessary, especially for a daughter who had disappointed him so thoroughly. Mrs. Hudson ushered Clara toward the house while Patrick took care of Rusty. "Don't you worry about a thing, Miss Clara," the older woman assured her. "Mr. Patrick's the finest man in these parts. You'll be safe here." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Though the furnishings were simple, everything was clean and well arranged. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the main room where a sofa and several chairs were grouped around a hand-woven rug. "The guest room's just down the hall," Mrs. Hudson explained, leading Clara past a small dining area. "Used to be Miss Maggie's room. That's Mr. Patrick's sister before she married the blacksmith from Fort Worth. I've put fresh linens on the bed, and there's water for washing up." The room was small but welcoming, with a neatly made bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that would offer a view of the surrounding countryside in daylight. On the dresser sat a pitcher and basin, along with a small vase containing wildflowers. "These are lovely," Clara said, touching a delicate blue petal. Mrs. Hudson smiled. "Mr. Patrick picked those this morning, said the room needed a woman's touch again." She patted Clara's arm. "Supper will be ready soon. You take your time settling in." Left alone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Just this morning, she had been the daughter of one of Redemption's most prominent citizens. Now she was effectively homeless, relying on the kindness of a stranger. Tears threatened again, but she blinked them back determinedly. She would not allow her father's rejection to break her. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Ellis," Patrick's voice came through the wood. "Supper's nearly ready if you'd care to join us." Clara quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her dress. "Thank you, I'll be right there." When she emerged, she found Patrick waiting in the hallway. He'd removed his hat and gun belt and washed the dust from his face and hands. In the warm light of the oil lamps, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with features that were handsome without being overly refined. There was a small scar near his right temple that she hadn't noticed before, and when he smiled, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. "I hope the room is comfortable," he said, gesturing for her to precede him to the dining area. "Very much so. It's kind of you to offer it to me." Patrick shook his head slightly. "It's nothing more than common decency, Miss Ellis." The dining table was set for 3, with Mrs. Hudson bringing over a steaming pot of what smelled like beef stew. Fresh, baked bread and a crock of butter completed the simple but appetizing meal. "Mrs. Hudson is the finest cook in the territory," Patrick said as he held Clara's chair for her. "I'd have wasted away to nothing after Maggie left if not for her cooking." The housekeeper swatted at him with a towel. "Don't you go filling the young lady's head with such nonsense. You were skinny as a rail when you first came west, and that hasn't changed in 10 years. Their easy banter spoke of long familiarity, and Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The meal was indeed delicious, and despite her emotional turmoil, she found herself enjoying both the food and the conversation. which carefully avoided any mention of her father or the scene in town. Instead, Patrick spoke of his ranch, the horses he bred and trained, the small herd of cattle he maintained, and his plans for expanding now that the railroad was pushing farther west. Mrs. Hudson contributed stories about the local community and occasionally reminisced about Patrick's early days in Texas. "You're not from here originally?" Clara asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly become her benefactor. Patrick shook his head. "Born in Boston, actually. My father was a shipbuilder. After he and my mother died of influenza, my sister and I decided to seek our fortunes elsewhere." A shadow crossed his face. "Maggie was 16 and I was 19. We had an uncle in Austin who helped us get established, but he passed a few years later. By then, I'd learned enough about ranching to strike out on my own." "Boston," Clara repeated, feeling a strange connection. "That's where I'm headed. The medical school there has accepted me for the fall term." Patrick's eyebrows rose in genuine interest. "A doctor, that's a fine ambition." "My father doesn't think so," she said before she could stop herself. A look of understanding crossed Patrick's face. "Is that why?" He didn't finish the question, but he didn't need to. Clara nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "He received my acceptance letter today. Said no daughter of his would engage in such unwomanly pursuits. When I refused to give up my plans, she swallowed hard. Well, you saw the result. His loss," Patrick said simply, but with such conviction that Clara felt her spirits lift slightly. After supper, Mrs. Hudson insisted on clearing away the dishes herself, shooing Clara toward the sitting area. "You've had quite a day, Miss Clara. Rest yourself by the fire and I'll bring some tea." Patrick added another log to the fireplace before settling into a chair across from where Clara had seated herself on the sofa. Scout padded over and laid his head on her lap, looking up at her with soulful eyes. "He's usually more reserved with strangers," Patrick observed, watching as Clara cautiously stroked the dog's head. "Must sense you're trustworthy." "I've always loved animals," she admitted. "Father wouldn't allow pets in the house, said they were dirty and disruptive, but I used to spend time with the horses in the livery stable whenever I could slip away." "You ride, then?" "Not as well as I'd like. Father thought it improper for a lady to ride astride, and side saddle always felt so." "Restrictive?" Patrick's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Well, there are no such restrictions here. If you'd like to ride while you're staying with us, you're welcome to any of the gentler horses. Might make your time here more enjoyable." The casual reference to her stay reminded Clara of its temporary nature. "About that," she began carefully, "the stagecoach to Dallas doesn't come through for another week, and from there I'd need to make connections east. I'll need to purchase my ticket as soon as possible, but I'm afraid I left town rather abruptly." "I'll be heading into Redemption the day after tomorrow," Patrick offered. "You're welcome to accompany me, or I'd be happy to see about that ticket for you if you'd prefer not to face the town so soon." His consideration touched her deeply. "Thank you, I'd rather not see my father just yet." Mrs. Hudson returned with the tea, and their conversation drifted to lighter topics. By the time the grandfather clock in the corner struck 9, Clara was fighting to keep her eyes open, the emotional exhaustion of the day finally taking its toll. "You should rest," Patrick said, noticing her fatigue. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to sort out the details of your journey." Clara nodded gratefully, rising from the sofa. "Good night, then, and thank you both again for your kindness." "Sleep well, Miss Ellis," Patrick replied, standing as she left the room. In the guest room, Clara changed into her nightgown and slipped between the cool, clean sheets. Despite the comfort of the bed, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the day's events. Her father's angry face, the slam of the door, the curious stares of townspeople, and finally, the unexpected kindness of Patrick O'Malley. What would tomorrow bring? And the days after that, as she made her way east to a new life so different from anything she had known. The questions swirled in her mind until, eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with the crow of a rooster and the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a moment, Clara was disoriented, expecting to wake in her childhood bedroom. Reality rushed back quickly, bringing with it a renewed sense of both loss and possibility. She dressed in one of the two dresses she'd managed to bring with her and made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Hudson was already preparing breakfast. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the warm space. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected to," Clara admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Hudson offered. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Not a thing. You're our guest." "I'd prefer not to be idle," Clara insisted, "especially if I'm to impose on your hospitality for several days." Mrs. Hudson studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "Well, you could set the table if you've a mind to. Mr. Patrick's been out since dawn, but he'll be in shortly with an appetite to match his height." Clara was just placing the last fork when Patrick entered through the back door, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He'd clearly been working, his shirt showing evidence of physical labor, but he'd taken the time to wash his hands and face before coming to the table. "Morning, Miss Ellis," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I trust you slept well." "I did, thank you." She returned his smile, surprised at how natural it felt. "Mrs. Hudson tells me you've been up for hours." "Ranch work waits for no man," he replied, accepting a heaping plate from the housekeeper with evident appreciation. "After breakfast, I thought I might show you around the place if you'd like." The idea of exploring beyond the house appealed to Clara, who had always chafed at the indoor confinement her father had considered proper for a young lady. "I'd enjoy that very much." Breakfast was a relaxed affair, with Mrs. Hudson joining them at the table this time. The older woman regaled Clara with stories of the community's early days, when redemption had been little more than a collection of tents and ramshackle buildings, populated by those seeking their fortunes on the frontier. "Mr. Patrick here arrived just as things were starting to civilize a bit," she said, refilling their coffee cups. "Wasn't much more than a boy, but he had good sense and a way with horses that caught folks' attention." Patrick looked slightly embarrassed by the praise. "Mrs. Hudson makes it sound more impressive than it was. Truth is, I was lucky to have good people willing to teach me the ways of ranching." "You were a quick study," the housekeeper insisted, "and honest as the day is long. That's why folks trusted you with their horses when others with more experience were passed over." Clara observed the exchange with interest, noting the genuine affection between Patrick and his housekeeper, who seemed to regard him with almost maternal pride. It was a far cry from the stern, formal relationship she'd had with her own father, where praise was rare and criticism abundant. After breakfast, Patrick excused himself to change his shirt before their tour, and Mrs. Hudson began clearing the table. Clara insisted on helping with the dishes, ignoring the older woman's protests. "It's the least I can do," she said firmly, taking a dish towel in hand. "Besides, I've always found dishwashing rather soothing." Mrs. Hudson gave her an appraising look. "You're not what I expected," she admitted as they worked side by side. "What did you expect?" "Well, Benjamin Ellis has a reputation for raising his daughters to be ornamental rather than useful, and after what happened yesterday." She trailed off, looking apologetic. "You thought I'd be helpless and spoiled," Clara suggested, not offended by the assumption. It was, after all, what her father had intended her to become. "Something like that," Mrs. Hudson acknowledged, "but you've got a practical streak and a willingness to work. Those will serve you well as a doctor." The casual acceptance of her ambition was refreshing. "My mother encouraged my interest in medicine," Clara explained, carefully drying a plate. "She suffered from a heart condition for years before she passed, and I spent much of my childhood helping to care for her. Our town doctor, Dr. Morrison, noticed my aptitude and began lending me his medical texts. And your father allowed this. He was often away on business during those years. By the time he realized the extent of my studies, I was already corresponding with the medical school." Clara smiled sadly. "He assumed it was a passing fancy that would be forgotten once I came to my senses and accepted one of my suitors." "But you had other ideas," Mrs. Hudson observed with approval. "I made a promise to my mother before she died," Clara said softly. "I promised her I would use what I'd learned to help others. Becoming a doctor is the fulfillment of that promise." They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and by the time Patrick returned, Clara felt more at ease in the ranch house than she had in her own home for years. Patrick had changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was damp, as if he'd quickly washed up. "Ready for that tour?" he asked, a hint of boyish enthusiasm in his expression. Outside, the ranch revealed itself in the full light of day. To the west, a series of corrals held horses of varying colors and builds, while to the north, a small herd of cattle grazed in a fenced pasture. The barn stood east of the house, its doors open to the morning sun. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory," Patrick acknowledged as they walked, "but it's good land with reliable water, and that's worth more than size out here." Clara was struck by the pride in his voice, not the arrogant pride her father displayed about his business ventures, but something deeper and more connected to the land itself. "How many horses do you have?" she asked as they approached the nearest corral, where several animals raised their heads to watch their approach. 23 at present," Patrick replied. "I specialize in breeding and training horses suited to ranch work. They need to be smart, sturdy, and have good stamina." He leaned against the fence, and a dappled gray mare ambled over to investigate. "This is Willow. She's one of my best brood mares." Clara reached out cautiously to stroke the horse's velvet nose. "She's beautiful." "And she knows it," Patrick chuckled as the mare nudged his pocket expectantly. He produced a piece of carrot, which Willow accepted with dignified appreciation. "Would you like to ride her later? She's gentle but responsive, good for someone who hasn't had much opportunity to ride properly." The offer was tempting. "I'd like that very much, but I didn't bring riding clothes." Patrick glanced at her dress, considering. "My sister left some of her things behind. She was about your height, though perhaps not quite as." He gestured vaguely, seeming to realize the impropriety of commenting on her figure. "Well, Mrs. Hudson could help you find something suitable if you're comfortable with the idea." The thought of wearing trousers was both scandalous and thrilling. In Redemption, such an outfit would have been unthinkable, but here, miles from town and judgmental eyes, Clara found herself nodding eagerly. "I would appreciate that." They continued their tour, with Patrick pointing out the various buildings and explaining their functions. The barn was particularly impressive, with stalls for the more valuable horses, a tack room filled with well-maintained saddles and bridles, and a small forge where Patrick demonstrated how he shaped horseshoes when the regular blacksmith couldn't make the journey from town. "You're quite self-sufficient," Clara observed as he expertly handled the tools. Patrick shrugged. "Have to be out here. Town's close enough for supplies and socializing, but far enough that you can't rely on running in every time something breaks or needs fixing." As they made their way back toward the house for lunch, Clara found herself studying her rescuer with increasing interest. There was a quiet competence about Patrick O'Malley that she found appealing, a stark contrast to the bombastic personalities of the men her father had encouraged her to consider as potential husbands. Those men had viewed her intellect as a flaw to be corrected rather than an asset to be valued, whereas Patrick seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and ambitions. It was a dangerous train of thought, she reminded herself firmly. In a week's time, she would be gone from this place, headed east to pursue the future she had fought so hard to secure. Developing any sort of attachment to Patrick O'Malley or to his peaceful ranch would only complicate matters. Still, as they approached the house and Scout bounded out to greet them, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging that had been absent in her father's home for many years. It was a feeling she would need to guard against in the days to come. After a simple lunch of cold chicken and fresh bread, Mrs. Hudson helped Clara sort through Maggie O'Malley's abandoned clothing. They found a pair of riding skirts that, while slightly short, would serve the purpose, along with a sturdy blouse that Mrs. Hudson quickly altered to better fit Clara's more generous curves. Miss Maggie was always on the slim side, the housekeeper commented as she worked. "But these will do fine for riding around the ranch." No one out here to raise an eyebrow except the horses, and they've seen far stranger sights, I assure you." Dressed in her borrowed riding clothes, Clara felt a new sense of freedom as she made her way to the corral where Patrick waited with Willow, now saddled and ready. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart beat a little faster. "You look like you were born to the saddle," he said, his voice warm with approval. Clara smoothed her hands over the unfamiliar skirt. "It feels strange, but good, like something I should have done long ago." Patrick's smile deepened the dimple in his cheek. "Sometimes the things that feel most right are the ones we've been told are wrong." He offered his cupped hands to help her mount. Ready. With his assistance, Clara settled into the saddle, adjusting to the feel of sitting astride rather than side saddle. The difference was immediate and exhilarating. She felt balanced and secure, connected to the horse in a way that had never been possible in the awkward, sideways position her father had insisted upon. "This is wonderful," she breathed, gathering the reins as Patrick had shown her earlier. "Take it slow at first," he advised, adjusting her stirrups before stepping back. "Willow's responsive to the lightest touch. Just give her a gentle squeeze with your legs when you're ready to move." Clara did as instructed, and the mare stepped forward smoothly. The sensation was so different from her previous riding experiences that she laughed out loud with pure delight. Patrick watched her make a circuit of the corral, calling out occasional guidance but mostly allowing her to find her own balance and rhythm with the horse. When she had completed several rounds, her confidence growing with each one, he opened the gate. "Want to try the open pasture?" he offered. "I'll come along on Rusty to make sure you're comfortable." Within minutes, he had saddled his own mount and joined her, leading the way through the gate and toward a gently rolling meadow that stretched behind the barn. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they rode side by side, Patrick pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories about the land and the animals that inhabited it. Clara found herself relaxing into the experience, appreciating not only the physical freedom of riding properly, but also the easy companionship that had developed between them. Patrick treated her as an equal, neither talking down to her as her father's friends often did nor attempting to impress her with exaggerated tales of his own importance. "How did you know?" she asked suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Patrick glanced over, questioning. "Know what? That I would accept your offer of help yesterday. You sent word ahead to Mrs. Hudson before I'd agreed to come." He considered this for a moment, guiding Rusty around a small depression in the ground. "I didn't know for certain," he admitted. "But I hoped you would. No one should face adversity alone if there's a helping hand available, even a stranger, especially a stranger. Friends and family have obligations to help one another, but extending kindness to someone you don't know, that's a choice that reveals character." He looked slightly embarrassed by his own philosophizing. "At least, that's how I see it." "It's a good way to see things," Clara affirmed, touched by the simple wisdom in his words. "Though I imagine such an outlook must occasionally lead to disappointment." Patrick shrugged. "Sometimes. But I've found that most people are decent at heart when given the chance." He nudged Rusty into a trot. "Want to try going a bit faster?" By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Clara's cheeks were flushed with exercise and excitement, her earlier worries temporarily forgotten in the joy of the afternoon's ride. As Patrick helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the unexpected connection that had formed in the space of a single day. "Thank you," Clara said softly, not moving away immediately, "for everything." Patrick's hands lingered at her waist, and for a heartbeat, Clara thought he might say something more. Instead, he nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips before he stepped back. "We should see to the horses," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Mrs. Hudson will have supper waiting." As they worked together to unsaddle and brush down the horses, Clara found herself stealing glances at Patrick when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about the quiet strength he exuded, the care he took with his animals, and the respect with which he treated everyone around him. It was a dangerous path her thoughts were taking, she reminded herself again. In a week, she would be gone, pursuing the dream that had cost her family. There was no room in that future for feelings toward a Texas rancher, no matter how kind or compelling he might be. Yet as they walked back to the house together, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the gathering twilight, Clara couldn't quite convince her heart to heed the logical warnings of her mind. The next few days fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Mornings began with breakfast, after which Patrick would attend to the more demanding ranch work, while Clara helped Mrs. Hudson with household tasks. The afternoons were often spent riding, with Patrick teaching Clara to handle Willow with increasing confidence. On the third day of her stay, Clara discovered the small collection of books in Patrick's study, an eclectic mix of practical manuals on animal husbandry and ranching, historical accounts of the Western Territories, and, to her surprise, several volumes of poetry and classic literature. "My mother's influence," Patrick explained when he found her examining a well-worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. She believed that beauty and practical knowledge should go hand in hand. He ran a finger along the book's spine. "These were among the few possessions Maggie and I brought west with us." "You must miss her," Clara said, recognizing the same lingering grief she felt for her own mother. Patrick nodded. "Every day, but I like to think she would be pleased with the life we've built here." He selected another volume from the shelf, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and offered it to her. This one was her favorite. Clara accepted the book, touched by the gesture. "My mother loved poetry too. She used to read to me before bed, even after I was old enough to read for myself." "What else did she teach you?" Patrick asked, settling into a chair nearby as Clara perched on the edge of his desk. "Everything she could," Clara smiled at the memories. "French, music, art, the usual accomplishments expected of a young lady. But also mathematics, which she loved, and natural philosophy. She encouraged my curiosity about the world. She sounds remarkable." She was. Clara traced the embossed letters on the book's cover. "After she became ill, she insisted that I continue my education, even when Father thought I should focus solely on domestic skills. She believed women were capable of far more than society generally allowed, a belief you clearly share." "Yes," Clara met his gaze directly. "Does that make you uncomfortable? Many men find such ideas threatening." Patrick considered the question seriously. "Not threatening, no, challenging perhaps to some of the assumptions I was raised with. But I've never seen the sense in limiting someone's potential based on whether they were born male or female." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "My sister would never have let me get away with such thinking in any case. She had firm opinions about women's capabilities." "I think I would have liked your sister," Clara said, smiling. "Maggie would have absolutely adored you," Patrick replied with such certainty that Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Hudson calling them to supper. But as they made their way to the dining room, Clara found herself wishing for more time, more conversations, more shared discoveries about each other's lives and thoughts. The following day, Patrick needed to travel into Redemption for supplies and to check on Clara's stagecoach options. Despite her earlier preference to avoid the town, Clara found herself volunteering to accompany him. "Are you certain?" Patrick asked as they finished breakfast. "Your father might be there," Clara squared her shoulders. "I can't hide forever. Besides, I need to retrieve some of my belongings if I'm to make the journey east." Patrick studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll take the wagon, more practical for bringing back supplies." The journey to town passed quickly, with Patrick pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Clara found herself laughing at his tales of local characters and the mishaps that seemed to befall every frontier community. As they approached Redemption, however, her mood sobered. The small town looked exactly as it had 4 days ago, yet everything had changed. She was no longer Benjamin Ellis's respectable daughter, but a woman who had been publicly disowned and who had then ridden off with a bachelor rancher. "We can still turn back," Patrick offered quietly, noting her tension. Clara shook her head. "No, I need to face this." The wagon drew curious stares as they made their way down Main Street. Clara held her head high, acknowledging acquaintances with a polite nod, but refusing to appear ashamed or contrite. At her side, Patrick maintained a respectful distance while still making it clear by his presence that she was under his protection. Their first stop was the general store, where Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened dramatically at their entrance. The woman hurried forward, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Clara Ellis, we've all been so worried about you, dear." She cast a sidelong glance at Patrick. "After what happened with your father." "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Peterson," Clara replied evenly, "but as you can see, I'm perfectly well." The older woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Your father has been saying terrible things, dear. That you've disgraced the family name, that you're—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with repeating Benjamin Ellis's more specific accusations. "I'm pursuing my education," Clara finished firmly. "As for any other rumors, I trust that those who know me will judge me by my character rather than by gossip." Mrs. Peterson straightened, suitably chastened. "Of course, dear, we all know you've always been a good girl." She turned to Patrick with a forced smile. "And Mr. O'Malley has a reputation for integrity. Now, what can I help you with today?" While Patrick attended to his supply list, Clara made her way to the stagecoach office across the street. The clerk informed her that the next eastbound stage would indeed arrive in 3 days, with connections that would eventually take her to St. Louis and then on to Boston. "It's a long journey for a lady traveling alone," the clerk commented as he calculated the fare. "You might consider waiting for a female companion." "I'll be fine," Clara assured him, counting out the necessary funds from her carefully hoarded savings. The ticket took nearly all she had, leaving precious little for expenses along the way. As she exited the office, ticket in hand, she nearly collided with her younger sister, Emily, who was emerging from the milliner's shop next door. "Clara," Emily gasped, looking around nervously before pulling Clara into a quick embrace. "Oh, I've been so worried about you. Father forbade us to speak of you, but I knew you wouldn't just disappear." Clara returned the hug fiercely, realizing how much she had missed her sister despite their brief separation. "I'm fine, Em. I've been staying at Mr. O'Malley's ranch. He's been very kind." Emily's eyes widened. "So the rumors are true? You're living with him?" "Not in the way people are implying," Clara clarified quickly. "His housekeeper is there and I have my own room. He simply offered me shelter until the stagecoach arrives." Relief softened Emily's features. "I knew you wouldn't." "Well, you know what people are saying, I can imagine." Clara sighed, then smiled at her sister. "But it doesn't matter. I'll be leaving for Boston in 3 days. So you're really going to become a doctor?" Emily asked, a hint of awe in her voice. "I am," Clara confirmed. "It's what I've always wanted." Emily squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, Clara. I wish I had your courage." "Emily," the sharp voice of their father cut through the air, causing both sisters to flinch. Benjamin Ellis stood on the opposite side of the street, his face darkening with anger as he took in the scene. "Come here at once." Emily cast an apologetic glance at Clara. "I have to go. He'll be furious." "It's all right," Clara assured her, though her heart ached at the separation. "Write to me in Boston. The medical school will forward your letters." With a final quick hug, Emily hurried across the street to their father, who seized her arm and marched her away without a backward glance at his elder daughter. Clara watched them go, a mixture of sadness and resolve hardening her determination. This was the price of her choice, but it was one she was willing to pay for the future she envisioned. She was so focused on her father's retreating figure that she didn't notice the approach of another man until he spoke directly beside her. "Miss Ellis, what a fortunate encounter." Clara turned to find William Blackford, the son of her father's business partner, and the man her father had most recently been pushing her to consider as a suitor. Tall and conventionally handsome, with carefully pomaded hair and an expensive suit, William had always struck Clara as coldly calculating beneath his polished manners. "Mr. Blackford," she acknowledged stiffly, "if you'll excuse me, I have errands to complete." "Of course." He fell into step beside her as she began walking toward the general store where Patrick was still collecting supplies. "I simply wanted to express my concern over your situation. Your father is understandably upset, but perhaps with the right intervention, a reconciliation might be possible." Clara maintained her brisk pace. "I appreciate your concern, but no intervention is necessary. My plans remain unchanged." William caught her elbow, forcing her to stop and face him. "Clara, be reasonable. This nonsense about becoming a doctor, it's simply not suitable for a woman of your standing." "Your father is right to object." "Release me, Mr. Blackford," Clara said evenly, though her heart was pounding with anger. "My educational pursuits are not subject to your approval nor to my father's." His grip tightened slightly. "You're being stubborn. Think of your reputation, your future. Who will want to marry a woman who cuts up cadavers and deals with all manner of unseemly conditions?" "I'm not concerned with marriage at present," Clara replied, trying to pull away. "Now, please let go of my arm." "I believe the lady asked you to release her." Patrick's voice came from behind William, steady and firm. William turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to disdain as he took in Patrick's workman's clothes and the easy confidence with which he carried himself. "This doesn't concern you, O'Malley. Miss Ellis is under my protection while she's a guest at my ranch," Patrick stated simply. "So yes, it does concern me." A sneer curled William's lip. "Her protection? Is that what they're calling it these days? Everyone knows what happens to a woman's virtue when she lives unchaperoned with a man." Clara gasped at the insult, but before she could respond, Patrick stepped closer to William, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You owe Miss Ellis an apology," William scoffed. "I owe her nothing. She's made her choices associating with your kind." The contempt in his voice raised Clara's ire beyond caution. "Mr. O'Malley has shown me nothing but respect and kindness, which is more than I can say for you or my father. If that reflects poorly on anyone's character, it isn't his." William's face flushed with anger. "You'll regret your decision, Clara. When you're penniless and alone in Boston, with no family to support you and no man willing to marry a woman who's compromised herself." His words were cut short as Patrick's fist connected with his jaw, sending him staggering backward. The blow was controlled enough to silence the insult, but not enough to cause serious harm. "That's quite enough," Patrick said evenly, flexing his hand. "Apologize to Miss Ellis, or the next one won't be so gentle." William straightened, touching his jaw gingerly. For a moment, it seemed he might escalate the confrontation, but a glance at Patrick's resolute stance appeared to change his mind. "This isn't over, O'Malley," he muttered before turning on his heel and stalking away. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, though there was little conviction in her admonishment. "It will only fuel the rumors." "Some things matter more than rumors," Patrick replied, his eyes still following William's retreat. "Are you all right?" The genuine concern in his voice touched something deep within Clara. No man had ever stood up for her choices before, defended her right to pursue her own path. "I'm fine," she assured him, surprising them both by briefly touching his arm in gratitude. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day when he had found her in the street. Clara felt her cheeks warm under his gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were standing and of the curious onlookers watching their exchange. "We should finish our errands," she said softly, reluctantly breaking the connection. Patrick nodded, offering his arm in a gesture that was both protective and respectful. "Let's get what you need from your father's house." The confrontation with William had drawn enough attention that news of it preceded them as they made their way to the Ellis residence. Clara steeled herself as they approached the imposing two-story home where she had grown up, knowing that retrieving her belongings would mean facing her father directly. "You don't have to come in," she told Patrick as they stopped at the gate. In fact, it might be better if you wait here." Patrick frowned. "Are you sure? After what just happened, my father won't physically harm me," Clara assured him. "His weapon of choice is words, not fists, and I need to do this on my own." After a moment's hesitation, Patrick nodded. "I'll wait right here. If you need me, just call out." Clara squared her shoulders and walked up the path to the front door. Before she could knock, it swung open to reveal her father standing in the entryway, his expression thunderous. "You have some nerve, showing your face here after your disgraceful behavior," he said by way of greeting. Clara met his gaze steadily. "I've come for my personal belongings, father, nothing more, so you can continue your shameful pursuit of an inappropriate education." Benjamin Ellis stepped aside reluctantly, allowing her to enter. "And with that rancher waiting at my gate." "The entire town is talking about your arrangement. Mr. O'Malley has been a perfect gentleman," Clara replied, moving past him toward the stairs. "Which is more than I can say for the men you've attempted to foist upon me as suitors." Her father followed her up the stairs, continuing his tirade. "William Blackford is from one of the finest families in the territory. He was willing to overlook your academic pretensions and offer you a respectable life as his wife. Instead, you publicly humiliate him and align yourself with a man who barely qualifies as civilized." Clara entered her bedroom, ignoring his words as she retrieved a valise from her closet and began efficiently packing the items she would need for her journey. Her medical texts went in first, followed by practical clothing, personal mementos, and the small jewelry box containing her mother's locket. "You're making a terrible mistake," her father continued, watching from the doorway. "Boston is no place for a woman alone. You'll be destitute within months." "I've received a partial scholarship," Clara informed him, continuing to pack. "And I've arranged to work as an assistant to one of the professors to cover my remaining expenses." Benjamin Ellis's face reddened. "You would rather scrape by in poverty, doing menial work, than accept the comfortable life I've arranged for you. What kind of daughter refuses such opportunities?" Clara closed the valise with a decisive click, then turned to face her father directly. "The kind who honors her mother's memory by pursuing her own dreams rather than someone else's expectations." The mention of her mother struck a nerve. For a moment, Benjamin's expression faltered, revealing a glimpse of the grief he still carried. "Your mother would never have wanted to see you cast out of society, your reputation in tatters." "My mother wanted me to be happy and fulfilled," Clara corrected gently. "She understood that my interest in medicine wasn't a whim but a calling." She picked up her valise. "I'm sorry that you cannot see that, father, but my decision is made." As she moved toward the door, Benjamin Ellis stepped aside, his anger seemingly deflated by the calm certainty of her words. "If you leave now, Clara, don't expect to be welcomed back when this foolishness inevitably fails." Clara paused on the threshold, looking back at the man who had once been the center of her world but who now seemed smaller somehow, diminished by his inability to see beyond his own rigid expectations. "Goodbye, father. I'll write to Emily when I reach Boston." With those words, she descended the stairs and walked out of her childhood home for what she suspected might be the last time. Patrick was waiting exactly where she had left him, his expression clearing with relief when he saw her emerge unscathed. "All set?" he asked, taking the valise from her hand. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice immediately as emotions threatened to overwhelm her. They walked in silence back to where the wagon waited, loaded with Patrick's supplies. Only when they were well clear of town did Clara finally allow herself to release a shaky breath. "That was harder than I expected," she admitted. Patrick glanced at her, his expression understanding. "Saying goodbye usually is, even when it's necessary." "I'm not sure it was really goodbye," Clara mused, watching the town recede behind them. "More like acknowledging that things can never go back to how they were. My father will never understand my choices." "Sometimes understanding has to come second to acceptance," Patrick offered. "He may never agree with your path, but perhaps someday he'll accept that it's yours to choose." The wisdom in his words struck Clara deeply. "You're remarkably insightful for a man who punches people in the town square," she said, attempting to lighten the mood. Patrick's laugh was unexpected and warm, brightening his entire face. "First time for everything," he admitted. "Though I can't say I regret it. Blackford had it coming." "He did," Clara agreed, finding herself smiling despite the emotional turmoil of the day. "Though I suspect it's done nothing to quell the rumors about us." "Rumors rarely stand up to the truth in the long run," Patrick said with a shrug. "And the truth is that you're a remarkable woman pursuing an admirable goal, regardless of what anyone in Redemption might think." His simple faith in her caused a warmth to spread through Clara's chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. As they continued toward the ranch, she found herself studying his profile, wondering how it was possible to feel so connected to someone she had known for such a short time. More dangerous still was the realization that in just 2 days, she would be leaving this place and him behind. The stagecoach ticket in her reticule seemed suddenly like both a promise and a loss. A step toward her future that would require leaving behind this unexpected present that had come to mean more to her than she had anticipated. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Hudson greeted them with refreshments and a sympathetic ear as Clara recounted the confrontations in town. The housekeeper's indignation on her behalf was oddly comforting, as was Patrick's quiet presence as he went about unloading the supplies. "People will talk themselves out eventually," Mrs. Hudson assured her. "They always do when something more interesting comes along to gossip about." "I suppose it doesn't really matter," Clara sighed. "I'll be gone soon enough." Something flickered across Patrick's face at her words, a brief shadow that was gone almost before she registered it. He excused himself to finish putting away the supplies, leaving Clara with an odd sense of loss at his departure. "He'll miss you when you go," Mrs. Hudson said quietly once Patrick was out of earshot. "More than he's likely to admit." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "We've only known each other a few days." The older woman's knowing smile was gentle. "Some connections don't need much time to take root." "I've known that boy for 10 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The observation sent Clara's heart racing, confirming suspicions she had been trying to dismiss as wishful thinking. "Even if that's true," she said carefully, "it doesn't change anything. I'm still leaving for Boston in 2 days." "Are you?" Mrs. Hudson asked simply. "Or are you running toward something new because it's safer than considering what might be possible right here?" The question lingered in Clara's mind throughout the evening and into the next day. As she helped with household chores and rode with Patrick in the afternoon, she found herself noticing details she might have overlooked before the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The gentle patience he showed with the youngest colts, the thoughtful attention he paid to her opinions during their conversations. By the evening before her departure, Clara was in a state of quiet turmoil. Her trunk was packed, her ticket secured, her plans set in motion, yet doubts she had never anticipated plagued her thoughts. Was she making the right choice? Was Boston still the answer, or had something changed in the past week that offered a different possibility? After supper, Patrick invited her to join him on the porch, where the cooling evening air offered relief from the day's heat. They sat side by side in comfortable rocking chairs, watching as the sun set in a blaze of color over the western hills. "I want to thank you," Clara said after a companionable silence, "for everything you've done. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day." Patrick shook his head slightly. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I'm still grateful. These days at your ranch have given me perspective." He turned to look at her, his expression curious. "Perspective on what?" Clara considered her words carefully. "On what's possible, on different kinds of lives than the one I was raised to expect." She hesitated, then added softly, "On what matters most." Patrick's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "And what does matter most, Clara?" The use of her given name without the formal miss sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "Connection," she answered honestly. "Purpose, the freedom to be true to oneself. And you believe you'll find those things in Boston?" There was no challenge in his question, only genuine interest. "I've always believed so," Clara replied. Medicine has been my dream for so long that I've never seriously considered alternatives. She looked out at the peaceful landscape spread before them. But I'm beginning to wonder if purpose can take different forms than I imagined. Patrick was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. Clara, I know we've only known each other a short time, and I have no right to ask this of you. But he took a deep breath as if gathering courage. Would you consider staying, not forever if that's not what you want, but just long enough to explore what might be possible between us? The directness of his request took her breath away. It was exactly what part of her had been hoping to hear, yet it still surprised her to have it spoken aloud. Patrick, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams, he hurried to clarify. There's a doctor in Fort Worth who might be willing to take on an apprentice. It's not a medical school, but it would be a start, a way to gain experience while. He trailed off, seeming uncertain how to finish the thought. While seeing if there's something worth building here, Clara suggested softly. Patrick nodded, relief evident in his expression. Yes, exactly that. Clara's heart raced as she considered the possibility. It wasn't what she had planned, not the clear, direct path she had fought so hard to secure. But perhaps there was more than one way to fulfill her promise to her mother, more than one path to finding purpose and meaning. I can't make that decision tonight, she said finally. It's too important to rush. Of course, Patrick agreed immediately. I wouldn't expect you to. The stagecoach doesn't leave until tomorrow afternoon, perhaps by then. He let the sentence hang unfinished between them, an open possibility rather than a demand. It was this, more than anything, that touched Clara deeply: his respect for her autonomy, his willingness to offer an option without insisting upon it. As darkness fell and they eventually moved inside, Clara's thoughts continued to circle around the choice before her. In her room, she unpacked her mother's locket from her trunk and opened it to reveal the small portrait inside. Her mother's gentle eyes seemed to look back at her with understanding rather than judgment. What would you advise, Mother? Clara whispered, tracing the familiar features with her fingertip. Is it foolish to consider changing course when I've fought so hard to stay the original path? No answer came, of course, but as Clara prepared for bed, she felt a growing sense of clarity. Her mother had always encouraged her to pursue happiness alongside purpose, to seek fulfillment in all aspects of life rather than focusing narrowly on a single goal. What would she think of Patrick O'Malley, with his quiet strength and his respect for Clara's ambitions? She would like him, Clara decided as she slipped between the sheets. She would appreciate his integrity, his intelligence, his willingness to challenge convention when necessary. Most of all, she would want Clara to make the choice that brought her both personal and professional fulfillment, whatever form that might take. The answer still wasn't clear when Clara awoke the next morning, the day of her scheduled departure. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with both Patrick and Mrs. Hudson respecting her pensive mood. Afterward, Patrick mentioned that he needed to check on a section of fence in the north pasture. I should be back in plenty of time to take you to town for the stagecoach, he assured her, his expression carefully neutral, though Clara could see the hope he was trying to conceal. I'll be ready, she replied, not yet able to give him the answer he sought. After he had gone, Clara found herself wandering the ranch house, touching objects that had become familiar in such a short time: the spines of books in Patrick's study, the patchwork quilt Mrs. Hudson had made, the smooth wood of the porch railing where they had sat the previous evening. Still uncertain, Mrs. Hudson asked, finding Clara staring out the window toward the distant hills. Clara nodded. How does one choose between two good paths, between a dream held for years and a possibility only just discovered? The older woman came to stand beside her. By listening to your heart as well as your head, she suggested. Dreams can change, dear. They can expand to include new elements we never anticipated. The question isn't which path to abandon, but which path allows you to be most fully yourself. The wisdom in those words resonated deeply. Clara had always seen her choices as either slash or propositions, either Boston or redemption, either medicine or marriage, either independence or connection. But perhaps there was a middle way, a path that honored all parts of who she was and who she wished to become. Her decision crystallized slowly over the next few hours, certainty building within her as she considered not just what she would be giving up with each choice, but what she would be gaining. By the time Patrick returned from his work, dust-covered but punctual, Clara was waiting on the porch with her answer. He approached cautiously, noting her packed trunk by the door but also the calm resolve in her expression. "All set?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Clara took a deep breath. "No," she said simply. "Not for Boston, at least." Patrick went very still, hope dawning in his eyes. "Clara, I'd like to speak with that doctor in Fort Worth," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And in the meantime, I'd like to stay here if your offer still stands." The smile that broke across Patrick's face was like sunrise after a long night, radiant and full of promise. "It stands," he confirmed, taking a step toward her, "for as long as you want it." Clara closed the distance between them, her heart racing with the rightness of her decision. "I can't promise forever yet," she cautioned. "There's still so much we need to learn about each other." "I'm not asking for promises," Patrick assured her, reaching out to take her hands in his. "Just for the chance to see where this path might lead, together." The word "together" held such possibility, such hope. Clara found herself smiling up at him, the last of her doubts fading in the warmth of his gaze. "Together," she agreed, "one day at a time." Patrick's hands tightened around hers. "May I kiss you, Clara Ellis?" The formal request, so respectful and yet so intimate, made her heart skip. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I'd like that very much." His lips met hers gently at first, a question rather than a demand. Clara responded with a certainty that surprised even herself, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened into something that felt remarkably like coming home. When they finally parted, Patrick rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "I think Mrs. Hudson might be watching through the window," he murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice. Clara laughed softly. "Let her watch, I have nothing to hide." And it was true, she realized. For the first time in years, she felt completely unconflicted about her path forward. There would be challenges ahead, certainly her father's continued disapproval, the adjustment to ranch life, the alternative route to medical practice, but she would face them without the burden of denying essential parts of herself. "What shall we do with your trunk?" Patrick asked, glancing at the packed luggage by the door. Clara considered this for a moment. "Unpack it, I suppose, though perhaps not all of it. Some things should stay ready for when we visit Fort Worth." "We," Patrick repeated, his smile deepening at the casual use of the plural. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Clara admitted, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had just shared. "It's strange how natural it feels, considering we've known each other barely a week." Patrick tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "Some things don't need time to be true, they simply are." The truth of his words resonated within her. What had begun with her being shoved into the street by her kin had led to this moment of choice, of claiming a future that honored both her professional ambitions and her personal happiness. And it had all started with a cowboy who had lifted her up and whispered 3 simple words: "Stay with me." As they walked hand in hand into the house to share their news with a delighted Mrs. Hudson, Clara felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the ending of her dreams, but their transformation into something richer and more complete than she had ever imagined possible. The road ahead would have its challenges, but she would face them with Patrick by her side, not as a replacement for her ambitions, but as a partner in building a life that encompassed both purpose and love. And in that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that her mother would have approved. 6 months later, Clara stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching as Patrick worked with a young colt in the nearby corral. The winter had given way to spring, bringing new growth to the land and new developments in their lives together, her apprenticeship with Dr. Harrison in Fort Worth had proven more rewarding than she could have anticipated. The elderly physician had been initially skeptical about taking on a female student, but had quickly recognized Clara's aptitude and dedication. 3 days each week, she rode into Fort Worth with Patrick, who had business interests there, and spent hours absorbing Dr. Harrison's considerable knowledge. On the days she remained at the ranch, Clara had discovered an unexpected passion for the work of caring for animals. Her medical knowledge proved surprisingly transferable, and she had already gained a reputation among neighboring ranchers for her skill with their livestock. "Penny, for your thoughts." Patrick's voice broke into her reverie as he approached the porch, wiping his hands on a cloth. The months of working side by side had deepened their connection in ways Clara had never imagined possible. They had been married 3 months ago in a small ceremony attended by a few close friends: Mrs. Hudson, Patrick's sister Maggie and her husband, and to Clara's surprise and joy her sister Emily, who had defied their father to attend. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out," Clara admitted, smiling as Patrick came up the steps to join her. "If you hadn't come along that day in town." Patrick slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her gently against his side. "I'm convinced we would have found each other eventually. Some things are simply meant to be." Clara leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Perhaps you're right, though I'm glad we didn't have to wait any longer than we did." "Speaking of waiting," Patrick said, his tone shifting to one of gentle inquiry, "have you given any more thought to Dr. Harrison's offer?" The offer had come the previous week, an opportunity to join the doctor's practice officially, with an eye toward eventually taking it over when he retired. It was an incredible chance, one that would allow Clara to fulfill her dream of practicing medicine while remaining close to the home and life she had built with Patrick. "I'm going to accept," she said decisively. "It feels right, Patrick, the perfect balance between my old dreams and my new ones." The joy in his expression was everything she could have hoped for, pride in her achievement, without a hint of reservation or concern about how it might affect their life together. From the beginning, Patrick had supported her ambitions as if they were his own, finding ways to help her achieve them rather than asking her to choose between her career and their relationship. "Dr. Clara O'Malley," he said, testing the sound of it, "has a fine ring to it." Clara laughed, turning in his arms to face him fully. "It does, doesn't it? Though I suspect some of the old-timers in these parts will still prefer to call me that lady doctor for a while yet." "Their loss," Patrick replied, bending to kiss her softly. "More patience for those with the sense to recognize your skill." As the kiss deepened, Clara marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the space of half a year. The path she had fought so hard to follow had not been abandoned but reimagined, expanded to include love and partnership alongside professional fulfillment. When they finally parted, Patrick rested his forehead against hers in what had become a familiar gesture of intimacy. "Happy?" he asked simply. Clara smiled, knowing the word could never fully encompass the depth of what she felt: the satisfaction of meaningful work, the joy of true partnership, the sense of belonging she had found in this place and with this man who had literally lifted her up when she had fallen. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" Patrick's smile deepened, revealing the dimple she had come to love. "More than I ever thought possible. You've brought life and purpose to this place, Clara, to me." The sincerity in his voice warmed her from within. This was what her mother had wished for her. Clara realized not just professional success or domestic contentment, but a life fully lived, with all the richness and complexity that entailed. As they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western hills, Clara felt profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as the worst day of her life, being shoved into the street by her kin, had led to this moment of complete fulfillment, all because a cowboy had lifted her up and whispered words that had changed everything. "Stay with me." And she had stayed, finding in that simple invitation not the end of her dreams, but their transformation into something far more beautiful than she had ever dared to imagine.